This woman has been locked away for thousands of years, but her appearance remains that of an 18-year-old. People inject large amounts of mercury into her body every day because if they don't, she will unleash the power of an evil god and destroy the entire world. Thousands of years ago, she was an ancient Egyptian princess. The pharaoh groomed her every day to be his heir. As the only daughter, Ahmanet was very ambitious, perfectly inheriting the pharaoh's ruthlessness and cruelty. She thought everything was settled, just waiting for the pharaoh to pass away so she could ascend to the throne as queen. But fate had other plans. A cunning handmaiden had somehow found her way into the pharaoh's bed, and worst of all, she gave birth to a prince. This drove Ahmanet mad. After all, since ancient times, the throne passed to a son, not a daughter. And the pharaoh's actions completely broke her heart. Overjoyed with a son in his old age, the pharaoh issued a decree on the spot, announcing to the world that he had chosen the prince as his heir. A typical case of forgetting the first child for the second. The arrival of this younger brother caused Ahmanet to completely turn to darkness. If something wasn't hers, she would simply take it. Soon, she performed a summoning ritual with her own blood and successfully met the evil god Set. Ahmanet then made a demonic pact with him. Set gave her a mysterious dagger. The moment she took the dagger, a powerful evil force surged into her body. Then, her entire body was covered in scriptures representing evil. Her eyes then transformed into eerie double pupils. Now Ahmanet's body was immortal and she had gained the powerful force of an evil god. The prize for this was to help Set descend upon the human world. Afterward, the ambitious Ahmanet killed the pharaoh with her own hands, then sent his family of 3 to be reunited in the underworld. With all obstacles cleared, Ahmanet now had to fulfill her pact with Set. That was to find a handsome man and stab him in the chest with the dagger of Set to complete the ritual. This would allow Set to descend upon the world using this body. But at the critical moment, her plan was exposed. Just as she raised the dagger, she was shot by the guards who had arrived. It was a special mercury dart that could suppress the evil power within her. Then, several guards worked together to hold her down. Because she had summoned an evil god, she was now immortal. So the guards decided to mummify her alive, a skill they excelled at, trapping her for eternity in a cold sarcophagus. The guards then transported the sarcophagus to a distant land, burying it deep underground where no light could reach. The dagger of Set was later split into 2 parts. The ruby from the dagger's pommel, at the end of the 11th century, was taken into a tomb as a burial good by a crusader leader. Centuries passed in the blink of an eye. A construction crew, while digging underground pipes, accidentally uncovered this tomb that had been sealed for centuries. They immediately reported their find to the relevant authorities. Before long, the doctor arrived with his team. He knew that the Crusaders had gone on a campaign to Egypt to expand their territory. Although they were unsuccessful, they had acquired a mysterious treasure. Meanwhile, at the entrance of a village in Iraq, there was a counter-terrorism squad. The protagonist, Nick, was a scout for the squad, but a soldier's salary was just too low. Using his position, he always tried to make some extra money during missions, often engaging in petty theft. One day, Nick stole a map from a historian named Jenny. A closer look revealed it was a map to an ancient tomb in Iraq, but he couldn't find the specific location for a while. Instead, while searching, he and his partner stumbled into terrorist territory. The next second, luckily, the 2 dodged in time and saved their lives. Since they couldn't withstand the enemy's siege, they had to request immediate military rescue. Fortunately, everything was resolved without any real danger. However, by a twist of fate, the bombs dropped during the battle between the 2 armies blew open the entrance to the ancient tomb. Staring at the giant stone statue of the pharaoh before him, Nick was completely stunned. Even if he had the nerve to steal, he didn't have the guts. With no other choice, he reported it to his superiors. Soon, the army commander ordered the entire tomb entrance to be cordoned off. At this time, the historian Jenny also arrived at the scene. To ensure the integrity of the artifacts inside, Jenny requested to go in first for a thorough investigation. The commander agreed, giving her only 2 hours. And he would send 2 people in with her to ensure her safety. Nick, who discovered the place, and his partner Chris were naturally the best candidates. Afterward, the 3 of them, Jenny, Nick, and Chris, successfully entered the tomb. This tomb chamber was enormous. Judging from the architectural style of the surroundings, this should be the tomb of an Egyptian royal family member. But strangely, there were no burial goods inside, and some liquid was constantly dripping from the ceiling. Nick reached out to catch a drop and found that the liquid was mercury. All this mercury was flowing to one place. Looking through history, it's easy to find that in ancient Egypt, mercury was used to suppress evil spirits. Not understanding, the group had no choice but to investigate the main chamber. Immediately after, the 3 arrived in the main chamber. In the center was a huge mercury device. 6 statues of Anubis stood around it, as if suppressing something terrifying. Because Jenny noticed that the guardians of the underworld, who should have been facing outward, were all facing inward in this tomb. All of this indicated that the thing in the tomb was extremely dangerous. The person imprisoned inside was definitely a great sinner. Just then, the commander on guard outside told them a storm was coming. They had to leave immediately, but Jenny wanted to stay and continue her research in the tomb. This led to an argument with Chris, who wanted to escape. They both asked Nick what he thought. Put on the spot, Nick said he wanted to keep looking. He then revealed his discovery. Below the 3 locked iron chains, there must be some kind of treasure hanging. After figuring out all the mechanisms, Nick fired a burst at one of the chains. Then, he broke the mechanisms one by one. The next second, the sound of gears turning echoed around them. A sarcophagus in the mercury below was pulled out by the chains. Perhaps even Ahmanet never expected that she would just happen to meet her destined person like this. The group was very happy to see this, thinking they had found some great treasure. But as the sarcophagus was lifted, Nick felt a pair of eyes staring directly at him. He instantly felt a chill run down his spine. Then, a strange sound came from the surroundings. Suddenly, many spiders crawled out of the tomb, scaring the group half to death. Suddenly, a few spiders crawled onto Chris. He immediately started breakdancing on the spot. Nick, on the side, was making sarcastic remarks. He told Chris that these spiders wouldn't bite. But as soon as he said it, he was proven wrong. The unlucky Chris was bitten on the butt by a spider. Now they had to leave to treat Chris's butt. Just then, Nick, full of curiosity, took another look at the sarcophagus. Unexpectedly, he found himself on a desert. Looking around, all he could see was yellow sand. Suddenly, a woman with a very striking figure appeared in his vision. It was the beautiful Princess Ahmanet. She leaned close to Nick, muttering that he was truly the one chosen by the god of death. At that moment, Nick felt as if his soul had been taken. Seeing this, Ahmanet wanted to do something more. Just then, Jenny saw Nick's lecherous expression and shouted, ruining the princess's moment. Snapping back to reality, Nick didn't understand why he was hallucinating. While he was still in a daze, Jenny, courting disaster, called for a helicopter to take the sarcophagus away. At first, everything seemed normal. But as soon as the sarcophagus was lifted out of the tomb, strange things started to happen. The crows in the area seemed to sense something. Suddenly, all the crows were circling above the tomb. Their hoarse cries echoed through the sky. At this point, they realized the sarcophagus hanging from the helicopter was too conspicuous. They decided to move the sarcophagus onto a plane to take it back to the research institute. But the crows, for some reason, all followed them frantically. Even more strangely, the surroundings were calm, but the next second, the group didn't have time to think. They needed to speed up the transfer of the sarcophagus. After a while, they finally managed to secure the sarcophagus on the plane. But the sandstorm seemed to be deliberately heading towards the plane. Luckily, God was on their side. The plane managed to escape at the last moment. The group finally had a moment to breathe. Nick and Jenny were still chatting. No one noticed that something was wrong with Chris. At this time, Jenny was studying the scriptures on the sarcophagus. It recorded the identity of the person lying inside. Jenny carefully explained to Nick. It turned out that the person suppressed with such great effort was named Ahmanet. As he was listening intently, Nick casually glanced at the sarcophagus. Unexpectedly, he made eye contact again and started hallucinating once more. Seeing a dagger about to plunge straight into his chest, he snapped back to reality with a jolt. He looked around, still shaken, and saw Chris standing by the sarcophagus sawing the ropes. The commander went over to ask what was going on. Unexpectedly, Chris's eyes were white, as if he were possessed. Then, he stabbed the commander in the kidney. No one understood what kind of fit Chris was having. The accompanying soldiers wanted to shoot him on the spot, but Nick wouldn't let them harm his friend. He urged both sides to calm down. But it's easy to be calm when you're not the one being stabbed. When he saw Chris about to stab him, Nick shot him without a second thought. Then this scoundrel fired several more rounds. Looking at Chris, who was now deader than dead, before he could even breathe a sigh of relief, a greater disaster struck. A flock of crows frantically crashed into the plane's windshield. The unlucky pilot was instantly pecked to death by the flock of crows. Then the depressurized plane began to lose control and fall. Because the plane's door was wide open, everyone was sucked out of the cabin by the airflow. At the critical moment, Nick played the hero, quickly putting the parachute pack he had on hand onto Jenny. The plane was still falling. After looking at Jenny, Nick pulled the ripcord on the parachute. However, his fate could only be death in the crash. Later, Jenny, who had survived, came to the hospital to see Nick one last time. At this time, the morgue was filled with the bodies from the accident. Suddenly, a corpse sat up abruptly. He frantically tore off the body bag he was in and began to greedily breathe in the fresh air around him. Nick was also confused about how he wasn't dead. He started to look around. The sudden appearance of Chris behind him scared him half to death. He suspected that he was actually a ghost now. But Chris told Nick not to be so dramatic. He really wasn't dead, but it would have been better if he were, because he was the man chosen by the evil god Set. And Chris, who was bitten by the spider, had long become Set's underling. Because the amount of information was a bit overwhelming, Nick was still trying to process it. Suddenly, the morgue door was pushed open. Jenny and the others walked in. Seeing Nick, who didn't even have his pants on, she was completely stunned. It turned out, back in the tomb, the princess had recognized him as the one chosen by the evil god. So she had long granted him immortality. Only the dagger of Set could kill him. Since Nick was still alive, it meant that there might be other survivors. The rescue team quickly sent 2 people to the plane wreckage. They wanted to search the scene again. The surroundings were incredibly eerie and terrifying. From time to time, the mournful cries of crows echoed in the sky. Just then, a sarcophagus caught one person's attention. He mustered his courage and opened the sarcophagus. Inside was a dried mummy. Just as he was about to call his teammate to see this new find, the princess suddenly started her meal, sucking him dry into a corpse. At this moment, his teammate, unaware of what had happened, walked over. Unsurprisingly, he also became the princess's after-dinner dessert. After a full meal, Ahmanet was completely unrestrained. She reanimated the 2 men's corpses and, leading an army of the undead, set out to find Nick and complete the ritual. Meanwhile, Jenny looked at the resurrected Nick with disbelief. Logically, in that situation, it was a miracle he wasn't smashed to a pulp. How could he be sitting across from her completely unharmed now? But Nick had saved her life after all. She stopped pretending. Jenny told Nick that she actually came from a special organization. The organization specialized in studying all kinds of supernatural phenomena. This time, her exploration of the ancient tomb was actually all for a dagger. This dagger was called the Dagger of Set. It was said that there was a princess in ancient Egypt, but for some reason, her name was removed from the records. And this Dagger of Set happened to belong to this princess. The pommel of the dagger had a ruby that gathered the power of an evil god. As long as the dagger was stabbed into the chest of the person chosen by the evil god would come to the mortal world. However, In later generations, that dagger was stolen by the Crusaders, and they removed the ruby and hid it somewhere. Fortunately, they recently found a Crusader's tomb. The organization should be able to get the gem soon. As for the map to Princess Ahmanet's tomb, it was also discovered through research in the Crusader's tomb. Now that the sarcophagus is missing, if the princess has escaped, then they're all completely doomed, because Ahmanet is a terrifying demon. After hearing all this, Nick decided to go to the restroom to process the information. But when he looked in the mirror, Chris appeared again. He told Nick that everything Jenny said was true. He shouldn't put up a pointless fight. It was better to just give in to that old witch. Nick didn't want anything to do with some princess or evil god. He prepared to go home and hide. But as soon as he reached the street, he heard a rustling sound. Suddenly, a dried corpse crawled toward him in a bizarre manner. Nick was terrified and ran for his life. But all the paths around him were dead ends. Then, a swarm of rats pounced on him. Just as the dried corpse was about to get him, a car came speeding towards them. Fortunately, Jenny pulled Nick out of the way. It turned out, Jenny had noticed he was acting strangely and followed him. Just now, Nick had unconsciously entered a hallucination again. After so many strange and bizarre things happened, even a fool would know he was being haunted by something. Nick quickly told Jenny about these things. Then, to prove he wasn't making it all up, he decided to take Jenny to find the missing sarcophagus. They were supposed to go to the crash site, but when they passed a church near the crash site, Nick insisted on going in. Jenny didn't understand what good it would do for Nick to go into the church. Unable to agree, the two went their separate ways. Immediately after, Nick, left alone in the church, started hallucinating again. After finally snapping out of it, he looked around and found himself inside the church. He backed away, trying to leave. Unexpectedly, someone came out and carried him away. Soon, Nick was carried by several dried corpses to an altar. Seeing this, Ahmanet pinned Nick down beneath her. After feasting several times, she had returned to her peak beauty. She carefully examined Nick, thinking that Set's taste was indeed excellent. She prepared to complete the ritual and summon Set. She smashed a stone statue in front of her. After so many years, she finally held the dagger of Set again. Excited, she immediately raised the dagger and stabbed down. But the ritual was not completed. The princess cursed. Who the hell stole the gem? Just then, Jenny, who was looking for Nick, saw this intimate scene. Still shocked that she was seeing the real Ahmanet, Nick yelled at her to stop drooling and run. But the princess wasn't deaf. Hearing Nick so concerned about this woman, jealous, she leaped over and grabbed her rival. She prepared to have Jenny for a snack. Seeing this, Nick quickly broke free. He grabbed the dagger of Set and stabbed the princess. Then the two quickly fled the church. Nick, behind the wheel, floored it to 280 miles per hour. Just then, Jenny looked at the dagger of Set in her hand and seemed to understand everything. Perhaps the princess deliberately crashed a plane near the church. She could sense the dagger's location and controlled the crows to shoot down the plane so that she could get the dagger right after waking up. And she kept creating hallucinations for Nick. Her goal was to manipulate him into coming to the church to complete the ritual. Hearing this, Nick stubbornly insisted that his will was strong. He would never be manipulated. But the next second, he ate his words. I'm going back to her. Nick finally realized that being too arrogant could get him killed. He floored it again and left the church. But several dried corpses were in hot pursuit. One even smashed a windshield with its skull. While fighting off the dried corpses, the car rolled down a slope and flipped over. Nick, with his immortal body, was fine. He was more worried about Jenny's safety. But as soon as he stood up, he saw Ahmanet slowly approaching. He prepared to fight her head-on. The result was predictable. However, the princess didn't bother with Nick anymore. Instead, she went to Jenny, ready to eliminate her rival for good. Just as she was about to succeed, an arrow suddenly pierced through her chest. Immediately after, several well-equipped people appeared. They continuously fired mercury darts at Ahmanet. Soon, they successfully subdued her. At this time, Jenny, who was trapped in the car, was also pulled out. Nick was about to ask who these heroes were, but he was shot with a tranquilizer dart. When he opened his eyes again, Nick found himself in a mysterious organization. They were actually pickling various demons and monsters in jars. He couldn't understand how someone could be so twisted. Then, Nick was brought before the organization's leader. He told Nick he was a doctor, with more titles than he could count. A few years ago, he tried to gain immortality through special means. Of course, he failed, and he also turned himself into a monster. Luckily, he developed a drug to suppress the mutation. Nick finally understood. The doctor had established an organization to fight supernatural forces. Jenny was also a member of the organization. They had been tracking Ahmanet for a long time. Because this old witch had lived for thousands of years, her research value was extremely high. Afterward, the doctor led Nick to see the current captive. The princess was bound tightly by several iron chains. They had studied ancient Egyptian texts and found that only mercury could suppress her powers. So they injected mercury into her body. Once it was full, they would lower the temperature to -39 degrees to solidify the mercury. Then they could dissect her and study why she had lived for so long. After listening for a long time, Nick didn't know what any of this had to do with him. The next second, he looked at the princess and entered a hallucination again. This time, he understood everything. It turned out he was the reincarnation of the chosen one from back then. Back then, he had willingly become the princess's subject. Now, the princess was trying to seduce him again, hoping they could work together to help set descent. Just as the princess was about to use a powerful move, a scream shattered the hallucination. It turned out the doctor had noticed something was wrong with Nick in time and quickly added more mercury. Burned by the mercury, Ahmanet let out a painful scream. She looked resentfully at the doctor who had ruined her plans. Meanwhile, the other people sent by the doctor were still digging up the Crusader leader's grave. When they found the main tomb and opened the sarcophagus, they really found the gem from the dagger of Set. At the same time, the chained Ahmanet also sensed the gem's location. She gave Jenny a disdainful smile. She asked Jenny, since they had gone to so much trouble to gather all the materials for the ritual, when were they going to start the ritual? At this point, Jenny finally realized. She found the doctor and loudly questioned him. If he wanted to study Ahmanet, then there was no need to collect the other things. Had he been planning to complete the ritual from the very beginning? The doctor casually replied that the evil god had higher research value. They could capture Set alive for research. Nick, who was listening on the side, was devastated. It turned out that no one had ever cared about his life from the beginning. And Jenny also felt that the doctor was insane and no longer wanted to work for him. As the three of them argued, the doctor suddenly felt unwell. He quickly took out his medicine. But just as he was about to inject it, Nick snatched it away. Without the drug to suppress him, the doctor lost his sanity and began to mutate. Seeing this, the others quickly ran away. But Nick, who was at the back, was locked inside. And this door could only be opened by the doctor. Watching the approaching doctor, with no way out, Nick decided to fight him. But he was as useless as ever. Just as he was about to be killed by the doctor, he quickly grabbed the medicine and injected it into the doctor. At the same time, the princess used all her strength to summon a spider. This small spider successfully climbed into the control room. Then it silently crawled into a young man's ear. After gaining control of the young man's brain, it manipulated him to walk straight to the mercury device. After shutting down the device, the young man grabbed an axe and went to the electrical box. Then, with one powerful swing, he smashed the organization's power system. Ahmanet took the opportunity to spit out all the mercury. Now her power was slowly returning. Meanwhile, the now sane doctor opened the door. Jenny rushed in and told Nick to go and destroy the gem. Perhaps that was the only way to save his life. Then the two immediately headed to the Crusader's tomb. The princess watched as the man who had obeyed her thousands of years ago changed his mind. She swore she would never trust a man again. Then she turned her grief into motivation. With her magic returned, she angrily broke the iron chains. At this moment, a staff member tried to shoot the princess. But unexpectedly, he just ended up filling the princess's stomach. The next second, the princess unleashed her ultimate move, summoning the power of the evil god. The entire organization was instantly devastated. In the blink of an eye, Ahmanet appeared on the street, summoning a sandstorm. She wanted to destroy the entire city. She wanted to build her own ancient Egyptian empire here. At this moment, Nick and Jenny were completely shocked by this scene. They could only flee in panic. At the critical moment, Chris appeared and showed them the way. Nick quickly pulled Jenny along, but suddenly a bus crashed into them. To save Jenny, the two were separated. With no other choice, Nick had to follow Chris to find the ruby. Then, Chris led Nick to the Crusader's tomb. He was muttering something. Nick listened carefully and was completely stunned. It turned out he was going to take him to Ahmanet. At the same time, the people still in the Crusader's tomb received a notification. Ahmanet was now heading in their direction. They must protect the gem at all costs. But the next second, Ahmanet suddenly appeared before everyone. With just a wave of her hand, the corpses that had been sealed in the tomb for centuries all crawled out on their own. Then all the dried corpses began to frantically attack the organization's members, and the people guarding outside, upon seeing Ahmanet, immediately opened fire with their guns. But this time, they hadn't brought any mercury darts. Ahmanet easily took care of them. At this time, the obstacles in the tomb had been cleared. The dried corpses respectfully welcomed the arrival of their queen. Ahmanet had waited thousands of years. She finally got to experience being a queen. Then, she successfully obtained the ruby. The dagger of Set was finally back to its original form. As long as she found Nick and completed the ritual, she could see the Set she had longed for. Meanwhile, Nick, who had been betrayed by his friend, had successfully reunited with Jenny. But the army of dried corpses was in hot pursuit, trying to capture them. Because there were too many dried corpses, the two could only flee frantically down the tomb passage. Little did they know, this was all a trap set by Ahmanet. The two reached the end of the tomb passage and fell headfirst into the water. Just as they thought they were saved and embraced, Ahmanet suddenly appeared behind them and dragged Jenny to the bottom of the water. Seeing this, Nick quickly chased after her. Suddenly, the dried corpses at the bottom of the water all awoke. They were determined to capture Nick and deliver him to the queen. At this moment, Nick saw Jenny. He quickly carried Jenny to the shore, but as soon as he got out, he was caught by the dried corpses. Nick, who was still struggling, was completely devastated when he looked at the water, because Jenny had now become a cold corpse. At this moment, Ahmanet walked over and made sarcastic remarks, saying that everyone must die, unlike them, who could live forever. So the two of them were a match made in heaven. But Nick had already fallen in love with Jenny without realizing it. Ahmanet asked him what he lacked compared to this mortal. Nick said that between a mad woman and an understanding woman, any fool would choose Jenny. Hearing this, Ahmanet was furious. She threw Nick away with her hand. However, Nick had already gotten a hold of the dagger of Set. He quickly smashed a gem on the ground. Looking at the shattered gem, just one more strike could end this whole farce. Suddenly, Ahmanet told him to stop. She shouted that without the gem, Nick would never be able to become a god. He would also lose the power to control life and death. Speaking of controlling life and death, looking at Jenny's corpse, Nick had an idea. Then, he willingly stabbed the dagger of Set into his own chest. At that moment, the light of the gemstone completely vanished. Nick's eyes also transformed into double pupils. After thousands of years, Set had finally descended upon the world. He slowly walked towards Ahmanet, but a casual glance at Jenny made him regain some of his senses. Now, two wills were fighting for control of Nick's body. It was thought that Set would surely win, but because the gem used in the ritual was shattered, Set was no match for Nick. Seeing this, Ahmanet tried to hold Nick down and awaken Set. But now Nick possessed the power of the evil god. He directly took back Ahmanet's power. At this moment, with no obstacles in his way, Nick came to Jenny. He used his divine power to successfully resurrect Jenny. The first thing Jenny did when she woke up was to look for Nick. But she found that Nick was about to say goodbye to her. Jenny tried her best to make him stay, but Nick said that he was now neither human nor ghost. He didn't want to drag her into a life of constantly hiding. Soon, the doctor arrived with his team. They resealed Ahmanet's body with mercury. Meanwhile, Nick had already resurrected his good-for-nothing friend Chris. The two began to search for a way to become human again. He still hoped to become human again and grow old with Jenny. The film ends here. The special effects in this film are very well done, especially the scene where the sandstorm sweeps through the city, which is particularly breathtaking. However, the film has some obvious flaws. For example, mercury vapor is toxic, but these people don't even wear protective suits. The tomb raiding genre should be quite original, but this film was made a bit casually. The horror atmosphere is there, but the tomb's trap design is too simple. You could even say this tomb is dangerously safe. Perhaps this film is mainly about being enjoyable to watch. Tom Cruise's acting has always been unquestionable. Although he's a bit of a wimp in this film, his performance still has a strong emotional impact. I hope he will have more good works in the future. Well, that's all for today's video. If you liked my video, please subscribe to my channel. Your support is my greatest encouragement.